Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Friday night's edition of Center Stage. I'm Kheri, Hines, your host. Tonight, if you are under the sound of my voice, it is not by accident. You are exactly where you need to be, because tonight we will discuss the topic, the potential impact of the Mike Brown grand jury decision. I repeat, the potential impact of the Mike Brown grand jury decision, and it will affect us all. See, a grand jury plays an important role in the criminal process, but not one that involves the finding of guilt or punishment. The prosecutor's office creates the narrative that a grand jury will hear. They decide whether a defendant will testify and exactly what evidence is presented. That said, we can be assured Officer Darren Wilson was painted in the best possible light. We can also assume Wilson's testimony was crafted around the eyewitness account that had been made public, seeing he had 2 months to create his story. So with all of that taken into account, must believe Officer Darren Wilson will not be indicted. And if that is the case, we could be just hours away from a revolution in the streets. The question is, are we ready? But before we begin, get on the phone, call a friend, call a neighbor, call a coworker, and tell them Center Stage is about to discuss the topic, the potential impact of the Mike Brown grand jury decision. But before we begin also, we want to remind you that the views and opinions of our guests and callers are not necessarily the opinion of Center Stage, the host, or our advertisers. With that said, we're having some difficulties on our board tonight, but we kind of expected that. That tends to happen when we discuss topics like this, so we've kind of gotten used to it. So we're going to try to go back into our boards again. They went blank a minute ago, and see if we can bring up our boards and get Brother Christopher Barnes on the line. Well, listen, y'all, every time we do a show on Ebola or Ferguson or any hot topic item, there tends to be some trouble on the switchboard, which we're starting to get used to that now. So, Christopher Barnes, good evening. Good evening, Christopher. How are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Switchboard problems again. I apologize. At first, there was no one on the board, and I was like, okay, I know something is wrong. And then we went completely blank, but thank God we're back up. That said, before we begin, any comments from you on the topic?
I'm just going to follow your lead in terms of what you've prefaced in terms of the discussion, and I'm looking forward to discussing some things that are very critical and very important at this time.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, my guest, for some reason I am not finding their number on the board. The boards are filled tonight. I'm going to ask Mr. Christmas if he would press one on and off so that I can find him on the boards, because for some reason we're not finding him on the boards this evening. And I'm not sure. Joe, our guest tonight, I'm sorry, I'll go back to that. Our guest tonight is going to be Gerald Christmas. He's a Ferguson attorney and ex-prosecutor during Ferguson. So who better to walk us through this particular process than Mr. Christmas? And he is not showing up on my boards, or I'm not identifying his number as one that I've had before. So we're going to give him a few minutes to get on the boards and make sure that everything is operating on our boards as and talk about where we're at tonight in terms of this particular case. A lot is riding on whether or not Officer Darren Wilson will be indicted. We know, based on what the accounts are that we've heard from eyewitnesses, that is, because we still have not heard Officer Darren Wilson's account of what happened on August 9th. But what we do know is, allegedly, based on what Dorian Johnson and some others have said, is that on that particular day, Dorian Johnson and Mike Brown allegedly went to a store, the Ferguson Market, and something occurred, per Dorian Johnson's second statement, that cigarillos were taken from Ferguson's Market, and then Dorian and Mike Brown were en route home when Officer Darren Wilson came upon them and asked them to get out of the street. Now, based on this testimony, there was no information known at that time about there being an alleged robbery at Ferguson Market. What we do know is that Officer Wilson asked them to get out of the street. And for whatever reason, they stated to the officer that they were just minutes or so from their home, and they did not get out of the street. Officer Wilson passed them up and then came back and almost hit them as he was trying to tell them to get out of the street. And at some point, he opened his door rather quickly, and it, I guess, bounced off of Mike Brown's leg and then shut. And they're assuming, but based on Dorian Johnson, that maybe Officer Wilson thought that Brown had intentionally done it. And so at some point there was words, and then there was an altercation. And from what we understand, per Dorian Johnson, Mike Brown was shot. And Mike Brown and Dorian recognized that Brown was shot, and they took off running. What we understand at some point, I'm not sure if it was due to the injuries that Mike Brown had encountered at that point, but he halted. And I understand he was wearing flip-flops, so it's not like he could have really ran very far from an officer in flip-flops. And at some point he stopped, turned around, and surrendered, got on his knees and said, "Please don't shoot." And Officer Wilson, per Dorian Johnson's testimony, continued to come toward Brown, at which time he continued to shoot. That said, based on just that, and a lot of the other witnesses, eyewitness accounts, collaborate that. If that is the story, if that is our official story, based on all the eyewitnesses, why is it that Officer Darren Wilson would be able to make a statement 2 months later and that be more believed than the eyewitness accounts that came forth immediately? That's my question tonight. None of that is making any sense to me. But I think that's the problem that most people are having with this whole process and what has gone forth so far. We didn't initially know who the officer was. We didn't get a whole lot of information about what he said happened initially. I think at some point the chief came out and said a few things about, what he thought, but he didn't even seem certain, in my opinion, of what he was saying had happened. And so everything was very sketchy. Now we're getting leaks out of the grand jury about what allegedly happened, which is not supposed to happen because the grand jury is a secret proceeding. So why are we hearing potential leaks? Well, we understand the DA's office responded yesterday and said, listen, these leaks, they didn't come from us. We didn't do this, and we want to go on record as saying we didn't put any leaks out there. So tonight we'll see. But as we said, we're waiting on Gerald Christmas to call in. So listen, if y'all know Gerald Christmas, get on the phone and call Gerald Christmas and say, listen, they're waiting on you. We're going to take some calls in the meantime. We're going to go to area code 314-853. Good evening. You're on Center Stage.
How you doing this evening?
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I was listening, to everything that you were saying. Mm-hmm. But this is the power of racism. And I keep hearing people say that black people can be just as racist as white people. You don't believe that, do you?
Not really. I guess you're right. We're probably one of the most forgiving races there is. So you're probably right. No, I agree.
There ain't no probably to it. When you talk about racism, you're talking about a race. You're talking about power. Black people do not have that type of power. And this is going to be just like the Emmett Till case, the same thing. They've been doing this stuff all the time. It's not going to change. And black people just don't have the power to change that.
It's funny you bring up Emmett Till because I really thought Mike Brown's mother and father should have opened the casket. I think that would have shown the full effect of what it was all about. I think just as Emmett Till's mother did years and years ago with her son after they, beat him to death in Mississippi, I think that the Brown family should have absolutely done the same thing.
Yeah, when I thought about when you said that, I agree with you. She should have left the casket open to see what they did to her son too. Mm-hmm. But the thing that's going on here, they would rather to have one match, just one match, to burn down a whole city and probably other cities. How racist can you be?
Well,
and they know that.
And what, Christopher?
In reference to the caller, and I agree with you, sir. There's an interesting thing about racism, especially when you bring that up in a diverse circle, or primarily among. I know myself when the issue or the subject comes up among some of my white counterparts. Right away, there's two things that they run off with, default back to, oh, well, black people are racist too. And then the other thing they say, oh, well, with flavor that, just get over it, this or that. Well, the issue with racism, from just the nature of the definition, like you said from the onset, its control is one of the key components of racism. Socioeconomic domination is a part of racism, and then also a measure that deals with the laws and the legal system is also a component. So that's something that black folks are a part of, but they don't own it. So therefore, black folks can have a racist mentality. Anybody can have a racist mentality, but to be a racist depicts control, the socioeconomic advantages, and white entitlement, white privilege, and so forth. So usually when an individual throws that back and says that, that's because they're trying to get away with the white entitlement that is there, that is interwoven into the American fabric. So in this case, dealing with Uncle Brown, people say, oh, well, there's nothing in race. The cop was just doing. I said, you must think I'm insane to think that there wasn't a racial component, if not the major component of this. And unfortunately, because the authorities were not transparent from the onset, see, they can't even play their cards right. They don't even realize that I believe that it was malicious in nature and that there was no reason for him to use the escalated lethal force. But due to the fact there's two things that police hide behind, and prosecutors, judges, everybody in the whole mix, they hide behind indemnity, immunity. Basically, they know, and that's the one thing that we don't have as citizens. If I go out and do something, if I lie, if I cheat, if I steal, I could get arrested and be brought up on charges. And mind you, I will be. But a police officer could do the very same thing that I did. They could withhold evidence. They could plant evidence. They could lie on the oath. But guess what? Immunity, partial or full immunity, means that it's like 99.9% of the time they're never going to be brought up on charges or even slapped on the wrist. And then the second thing is, from the beginning, cops mainly hide behind probable cause, because you could have had a Twinkie in your hand, and a cop could say, I thought it was a gun. Well, according to the courts, that's enough for a white cop to shoot a black man, because they could say, oh, it's reasonable to think, to have thought that Twinkie was a gun. So you would justify it, and that is kind of like full circle of some of the spectrum of racism.
I agree. Well, hold on, caller. We're going to try to go to area code 301-358. Good evening. You're on center stage.
Yes. How you doing, ma'am? My name is Jerry Watson, and I am here to weigh in on it. With the Michael Brown case, I think what it actually is that the police department can only justify what they are able to do. So when they had shot this young man maliciously in the back of the head for no reason at all, they was actually in the wrong. So for him to even have a jury trial stating that that they're ready to release this officer, that is wrong. For the simple fact that officer had killed this young man for no reason at all. And in my heart, I feel like that everything should be done as far as to prosecute that police officer for maliciously killing this young man. And I don't know if you feel the same way, but that's the way I feel.
Oh, no. I completely agree. Let me ask you this. What do you think, caller, is going to happen if they don't indict him?
Well, if they do not indict him, I think it's just going to be like the Martin Luther King uprising when Martin Luther King got shot and killed. I actually think it's going to be similar to that. What happened over here in the metropolitan D.C. area where I live at. That's why I actually think it's going to happen.
So, will it be justified if that happens, or should people just play life like we always do? And, you know, unfortunately, we are so known for doing our marches and then going home. And I think everybody else knows that that's typically what we do. We go and we march and we say we have overcome, but in most cases we never overcame.
We know that's right. We never overcame. But I actually think what we should do is, now, I'm a Christian. I believe right is right and wrong is wrong. Mm-hmm. And I believe that if we do go out here and try to justify the wrongness that what had happened, I think it's going to be a whole lot more Michael Brown scenarios that's going to be hurt. You see what I'm saying? Or killed. Mm-hmm. So I feel in my heart, if anything, we should unite, but we should unite in a different way. And I feel like that. And I feel like that the way that we should unite is that we should have, with our black young men and women, they need to be educated on how to be more successful within their life, and how somebody need to actually teach them how to be successful within their life.
No, saying that, what does that have to do with what we should do as a result of this process? I mean, or whether or not the grand jury finds him guilty or not? Because that's like what you're saying. It sounds like it's something we need to do down the road. It's not anything that we're going to be able to fix.
With the grand jury prosecuting the officer, I think what they need to do is just let's see. I can't say turn away, because if I tell the people to turn away, then I might be in the wrong because down the road then they might end up killing somebody else wrongfully.
Yeah, and we can we're not trying to. Center Stage is one of those shows that we never tell people what to say or what to think. We're not that kind of show, but we appreciate your opinion. And I'm of this thinking. Since Mike Brown, there's been others that have died, even in the St. Louis area. And I'm not sure what the count is, but I think it's at least two. The young man that had the soda pop or whatever that was that he came out of the store with, and then we know the Von Derek Myers case that just happened. The young man that was allegedly carrying a sandwich or something at the time in which he was shot. And we understand,
correct.
And that's another. That's another reason that Gerald Christmas is going to be on the show this evening. Von Derek Myers is a case that he's handling for that family, and we understand that Von Derek Myers was shot 8 times in the back. And I think, based on something I saw on Mr. Christmas's page, the fatal shot came when Mr. Myers was on the ground, unable to move. And was begging not to be shot again by the officer, and that's when he took the fatal shot to the head. So that's another thing that Mr. Christmas was supposed to come on tonight and talk to us about. And again, we're waiting for him to get on the phone line. In the meantime, we're going to go to area code 770-879. Good evening. You're on Center Stage.
Oh, hello. How are you, Kheri Hines?
Fine. How are you?
Great. This is Mary Neal. Yes, good evening. I was enjoying listening to the different opinions regarding what's happening in Ferguson, and I want to thank you so much for bringing us thought-provoking conversations around this very important matter. And I want to say it's good for us to talk about this, and it's good for people to march, but we cannot expect marching and protesting to do more than raise people's awareness about the problem. It does not really impact oppressors for people to march and sing and what have you. It doesn't impact them because it does not take away any of their money or any of their power, and anything that does not affect them financially or in the position of power is ineffective, because that's all they really care about. And so the thing is that marching and singing and protesting are all good, because they do raise awareness about an issue. They do register objections to human rights violations, and they do also expose America as being a country where a great many human rights violations happen. But it doesn't really impact oppressors as much as if we are able to organize around the idea of something that will have economic impact. That's all they really care about. If you notice, when you go through a red light, you don't get police marching in front of your house. You get a ticket. You have to pay financially. And if you get maybe a couple of tickets, your insurance goes up. They show you what matters. What matters is money to them. And so, therefore, since money is what matters, and that is how we should impact them with money, economically. And so I just want to place that suggestion in there and say again that it's good to march and sing. It has its place. But there's no financial impact to doing that. Now, there is a financial impact to rioting, but you don't want to go there. These are not the 1960s. This is the 21st century, where we don't have drone planes and they do. We don't have crowd-controlled tasers and they do. We don't have helicopters to fly overhead and shoot people as they run, and they do. You are outmanned and outgunned. So rioting would certainly not be something a person wants to do, even though it does have financial impact. But usually that financial impact is turned on our own communities, and it doesn't really impact the oppressors as much as you might think. Since most rioting is done where we live, instead of going down to the official offices or going to the governor's mansion. Most riots are done where we live, and it just makes your community be a blight, and it hurts the people who live there probably more than it does the oppressors. So that's not a good idea. It's certainly a bad idea in the 21st century with all these concentration camps that they've already got stocked with food and everything, and even have hired people to be personnel. So it's not a good idea, and so we need to think of an economic way to protest. Thank you, Kheri. Go ahead and say what you want to say.
No, you know what, Mary, I have to agree with you. I really, and I have not been in Ferguson. I have not been in St. Louis, but I really feel like the protest would potentially turn deadly this time. I really feel like now probably it's not going to be safe to go out there, and I think the protesters did exactly what they were supposed to do in getting the attention of the world with the Mike Brown protest. However, I think this particular time, if they don't indict Officer Wilson, I believe the riot or protest or whatever you want to call it will turn deadly. And so I don't know that we're prepared for it. I think, as Mary said, we don't have the bullets, we don't have the armor. We're physically not prepared, we're mentally not prepared, just based on what I've seen. And that probably, is something I really don't have a right to say because I'm not a part of anything of the organizing going on up there. I get that. But from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing online, I don't think so. And I think you got to realize if you take a gun out there, you're automatically going to be targeted as the person who's the agitator or the aggressor, and they have every right to just shoot you down in the street. And so I think, how do you win? I mean, you go up against an armored vehicle, with somebody, shooting at you from the top of a vehicle that, is encased with glass that, even a regular bullet couldn't penetrate. I just don't think it's safe. That's just my opinion, but I'm not there. But our guest has arrived. Good evening, Mr. Christmas. Welcome to the stage.
Good evening, Kheri. How you doing?
We're good. We're glad you showed up. Listen, I think we miscommunicated to Mr. Christmas what time he was supposed to be on the panel, and for that I do apologize. Good evening, Mr. Christmas. I told him, first of all, you're a Ferguson attorney, a criminal attorney, as well as an ex-prosecutor there in Ferguson. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I was an ex-prosecutor in the city of St. Louis.
In the city of St. Louis, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, looking at what we're looking at in terms of this particular case, things are looking very bad from the angle that I'm sitting, but I don't have your experience. How are things looking from the angle that you're sitting in based on the experience that you have?
I don't see that there's going to be an indictment based on the experience that I have. You and I talked about this some months ago, and I think I told you the same thing. The grand jury process, normally when we send cases to the grand jury, when I worked in the prosecutor's office, we had already made a decision to charge them. Under normal circumstances, we charge by what's called information, and then we just send it to the grand jury for confirmation. Because when you go to the grand jury, it's just a probable cause hearing. It's not to determine guilt or innocence. All you're determining is, do we have probable cause to move forward, meaning, do we have the right person? Are they charged correctly? And is there enough evidence to move forward to trial? So it's a really low burden to meet. And generally, over 90% of the cases are indicted in grand jury. The way that the criminal justice system works is that once the prosecutor's office makes their charges, there has to be an independent party that looks at it to determine that they're on the right course.
Am I understanding, based on what I said in my intro, that everything basically the grand jury sees is basically the prosecutor's narrative? So, in terms of every bit of evidence, that's only the evidence that the prosecutor wants them to see, correct? They don't necessarily get every bit of evidence, but just what the prosecutor wants them to see, correct?
Just enough for probable cause. 99% of the time when we present a case to the grand jury, when I say we, meaning the prosecutor's office, even though I'm no longer in the office, they're presenting that case to get an indictment. So you can give them enough to show that you have probable cause, because they don't determine guilt or innocence. So you're not giving them everything. Anytime you hear somebody say they're giving the grand jury everything, that's an attempt to confuse them and also an attempt to get a no true bill. And that's what prosecutors do when they don't want to issue charges. And then they come back and say, well, the grand jury did it, not me. But in actuality, the grand jury is an arm of the prosecution. They do whatever the prosecutor says. There's nobody in there but the prosecutor and the grand jury. There's no defense in there, and there's no obligation to present a defense or to cross-examine.
Okay, well, this is all hypothetical, what I'm about to ask y'all, so be clear. He said he does not work for the prosecutor's office. He used to work for the prosecutor's office, but it was in St. Louis. Okay, let's just say if they did not want to indict Officer Darren Wilson, what information would they have presented hypothetically to this grand jury?
Well, they would present the same information, but you have to remember they're going to present it, with certain tones and cues that would signal to the grand jury that this is not a case that they're really interested in pursuing. What you have to remember is that this is a holdover grand jury, meaning that normally grand juries serve for 4 months at a time, and you have 3 grand juries a year. So this grand jury is accustomed to hearing cases from this prosecutor's office. They're used to the prosecutor's office telling them what the charge is and asking them to indict on that charge specifically. So they know, they're intelligent enough to know that this is being presented to them differently when they tell you, well, you look at it and decide, we don't know what the charge is. I mean, right there is telling you, if you sit on that grand jury, that something is up with this case.
Hey, Kheri, I got a quick interjection. Good evening, attorney. I have a quick question in reference to how you were laying out the procedure and how the grand jury is essentially an arm of the prosecution. Isn't it also true that part of what either the district attorney or the state's attorney depends on is the report or the investigation, because their information technically, from what I understand and what I went through, comes from the police. So if the police also don't want to see justice done, isn't it pretty much clear and obvious that they're only going to give the prosecutor what they want to give them? Because in essence, the prosecutor at that point, extracting the information, they have no way of knowing if that police department or the officer that is presenting the case is actually giving them all the evidence either. So it can be misconstrued, because if the police decide at that point that there's, let's say, 200 pages of documentation, but they want to cherry pick 12 and only give that to the prosecutor. So is that reality?
You know, hypothetically that could happen, but usually they turn over all the information to the prosecutor's office, and then the prosecutor's office have their own investigators that they can send out, and they can also subpoena their own independent witnesses if they want to the grand jury. So they have some autonomy from the prosecutor's office, but you have to remember there's a very close relationship between the prosecutor's office and the police department. They're like first cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So usually when I was a prosecutor, you know, if we looked at a case and we decided to issue the charges, we would go ahead and issue the charges, and then we just send it to the grand jury for confirmation. Two ways we can get an indictment, either at the grand jury level or in a preliminary hearing. What happens in a preliminary hearing is that it's done in open court. The defense is present. They have an opportunity to cross-examine the witnesses that the state presents, and then the judge determines if there's probable cause to indict. And most of the time we send simple cases to a preliminary hearing, guns, dope cases, minor burglaries, car thefts, you know, that only involve maybe one or two witnesses. You'll send those type of cases to a preliminary hearing here in Missouri. And then you'll send more complicated cases to the grand jury where you have multiple witnesses, or if you have a sensitive case like maybe a sexual assault where you don't want the victim testifying in open court and open to cross-examination yet the way that they would be at trial. So to get an indictment, you send those kind of cases to the grand jury. But, you know, over probably 95% of the time, probable cause is found at the preliminary hearing level and at the grand jury level, because it's just probable cause. You know, really, if there wasn't probable cause, most of the time the cases wouldn't get issued. And that's why this is just such a charade right now, because probable cause is just such a low hurdle to meet. Again, all you're trying to do is determine, is this person charged correctly? Do we have the right person? And is there enough evidence to go forward? That's all the grand jury is determining. They're not determining guilt or innocence. They don't need every piece of evidence. That's not their role. That's not their role. Every piece of evidence, you don't even present every piece of evidence at trial, because most of the time trial strategy, both defense and prosecution, are going to present the best evidence at trial to get the verdict that they want.
True.
So,
I have one more quick question. With that being the case, then in this case, let's hypothetically say that Officer Wilson is indicted, and then after the fact, let's say new evidence comes that would exonerate him. Would it be fair to say
that would be up to the defense to present that at trial?
No. Well, that's true. But let's just say that the very people who are trying to prosecute him get a hold of information that could exonerate him, but they basically deny all of that and go to trial.
when they have evidence that is conflicting, let's say after the fact? Would that be something that should be brought up before trial, or should it be just go to trial and then that information should come out?
No, if they have evidence, they have to turn that over before trial. And if you find out later after trial that they had evidence that they withheld, and they should have turned that over to the defense at trial, then those are grounds for an appeal and a new trial.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and speaking of testimonies, I think a minute ago you all talked about testimonies. I understand, based on one of our conversations, Joel, that actually testimony from the defendant is a rare thing in terms of going before the grand jury. Is that the case? You all typically didn't even ask the defendant to come forward because of the fact that they would possibly incriminate themselves.
No, it doesn't have anything to do with them incriminating themselves. It has to do with the fact that we're the prosecutor's office. We're trying to get an indictment. We're not interested at this point what the defense has to say. If the defense has something to say, they can bring it up at trial. We're trying to move. When we send a case to the grand jury, we're moving it to the grand jury to get an indictment so we can go to trial. We're not interested in any defense at this point. That's why 99% of the time the defendant is never asked to come in and testify. Usually if a prosecutor asks the defendant to come in and testify, they want to get rid of it. Because with the prosecutor's office, we're moving to trial. We're not interested in what the defense has to say at this stage. Remember, this is the indictment stage. We're trying to get an indictment so we can then go to trial. So that's why the defense is not invited to testify, because at this point, all we're trying to present to the grand jury is enough for us to get probable cause and move to trial. This is not a time to hear from the defense.
So how did Darren Wilson end up testifying?
Because the prosecutor invited him to testify, because he don't want an indictment.
Okay.
That's why. And then as a defense attorney, the other thing is that normally you don't even want your client testifying in the grand jury, because anything he say can and will be used against him. And you never really want your client testifying with the prosecutor's office, and you can't be in there to hear the testimony. Because, see, no one else is allowed in the grand jury. So as a defense attorney, you can't go in there with your client. So on rare occasions, will defense attorneys allow their client to testify? And even if they do, they want them to go in there quickly and come out. And most of the time, a defense attorney is only going to let his client testify if he has an understanding from the prosecutor's office that he's going to be treated correctly and it's not going to be a problem. You understand what I'm saying? So sometimes prosecutors have said to defense attorneys, this is really a bad case. I'm really not interested in pursuing it. Why don't you come on and let your client testify at the grand jury, and that'll be the way we can get rid of it,
Mm-hmm.
And definitely in Darren Wilson's case, having him go in and testify for 4 hours, I'd be on pins and needles with my client in there for 4 hours, and I can't be in there. So I wouldn't do that. The only way that I would let my client testify before the grand jury for 4 hours, unless I was very comfortable in what the outcome was going to be. I'd have to be extremely comfortable.
So when McCullough came out this week or yesterday and said that there were no leaks coming from the grand jury and all of that was just, somebody, I guess, getting all confused because it didn't come from them, what do you think on that? I mean, is that possible that we could be really getting like misinformation about the leaks, or do you really believe the leaks that we've heard so far?
I believe that there were leaks that came from the grand jury. We have to start really thinking. My grandmother used to say, your head has to be more than a hat rack. Don't let people just tell you anything and you believe it. It's the same situation I'm dealing with. I represent Von Derek Myers, the other shooting here in St. Louis, and people can't wrap their head around the fact that the police would plant a gun on somebody. And for us to work in law enforcement and deal with crime scenes and things of this nature, it's like, really? You just can't believe something just because somebody said it. You have to question that. Any leaks that are going to come out are coming from that grand jury. That's how it's coming. Nobody else would know this information. Who else knows this information but them? And then the prosecutor's office investigating themselves, telling you that everything okay. That's the problem with the police. The police investigating their own police shootings and controlling the crime scene, and they want us to believe everything is all right, everything's on the up and up with them? No, especially not in this case. This case is going to be an example. It's going to be a case study on how not to do something because it's a mess. It's a total mess.
Well, was it,
Bob McCullough should have recused himself from the beginning. It's just a total mess. All the way up and down.
Was it a mess by design, though? Because in my opinion, I mean, I'm not a police.
It was a mess. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It was by design, though, right?
Correct. You right.
Okay.
Trust your instincts. You right. It was a mess. It's a mess by design. You know why the leaks are coming out? I'll tell you why the leaks are coming out. Because they wanted to bring down the expectation that there was going to be an indictment so that when they do release it next week, by the way, the force in St. Louis City is going on 12-hour shifts starting November 9th through the 14th. So you know what that means, right?
Wow, yeah.
12-hour shifts, no days off. November 9th through the 14th. So you can expect something to come out probably November 9th or 10th because they're not going to wait to the end of their 12-hour shift to release it. But this is the deal. They wanted to bring down the expectation that there would be an indictment so that people would not be so fired up when they told you that there was not going to be an indictment, okay? So that's why you started having these leaks that started happening 2 or 3 weeks ago, because now nobody's expecting an indictment. Are you expecting one?
No.
They served their purpose. You know, the purpose of those leaks, and I question whether or not it was all the state doing it, because I think the feds may have been in on it too. They may be playing both sides of the fence, because everybody wanted to bring down the expectation level, because if you kept the expectation level so high that this officer was going to get indicted, and then when you came out and said there was going to be no indictment, that was going to really enrage the people. So now nobody's expecting an indictment. So when you say in a week or two that there's no indictment, everybody's going to say, well, you know, we weren't never expecting one at this point because there's been so many leaks. But you don't have these kind of leaks that come out of the grand jury.
But will that change the process? I mean, will that change the protest, though, or will it just ignite it? You know what I'm saying?
You know, I think the way that these people are here, they're still going to be ignited. But I think they have been successful in bringing the level down some because, you know, people are just not, their anxiety level about getting an indictment is not as high now because most people don't expect one. So to a certain extent, they have been successful.
But, you know, it kind of depends on what you gauge as success. Because I think people are more angry than ever. I think people are more distrustful of the police than ever. I think in terms of the system, people absolutely don't believe in the system anymore. We feel like it doesn't work for black people. So successful, you know, by what, you know, I mean, how do you look at that as being successful? I mean, in terms of, I guess, people not being disappointed by the announcement, yeah, but at the same time, it's changed the game. In my opinion, this has been a game changer in terms of people looking at the system as being completely broken and not even repairable, you know, at the way we're looking at it now. It has to be a complete overhaul or nothing, a complete overhaul or nothing.
I think you're correct. I think you're correct. It is a game changer, and people are going to be disillusioned about the system. When I say a success, I mean they were able to bring the level down in the sense that people are still angry about the system, but nobody's expecting an indictment now. I think if you had a larger population that were all expecting an indictment, they would really feel deflated and more upset when they heard no indictment. But now everybody's anticipating no indictment, so it's not going to have the same effect as it would have if everybody had been really believing that this officer was going to be charged. So in that sense, I don't believe it's a success in saying that we have the perfect system, but they were successful in bringing down the anxiety level.
Okay, I can really see that. In terms of, you know, looking at this particular case as a game changer, when you look at the police department as a whole and they're asking the police chief down there in Ferguson to resign, what do you think about that?
I think that Chief Jackson definitely needs to go, but he's low-hanging fruit. He's being used as a scapegoat. The mayor of Ferguson should go. The chief of police, Jackson, should go. Belmer, who's the chief of police in St. Louis County, should go. Dotson, the chief of police in St. Louis, should go. You know, all these people should go. We should clean house across the board. You know, don't just hand us Jackson and say, you know, be satisfied. Belmer's also the one that tear-gassed us and threw the rubber bullets and signed off on everything that Jackson was doing. He was in charge when the governor had to send the state troopers in. So all of those people need to go. You know, when you had the scandal at Secret Service, the head had to resign. When you had the scandal at Veteran Affairs, they left. When you had the failed rollout of Obamacare, Health and Human Services Secretary left. It's been 83 days since Mike Brown was killed, and nothing has changed, with the exception of 2 more young men have been killed by the police.
I agree. You know, and when you look at the I don't know, the morale from people, just everyday people, it's really low in terms of how we feel in terms of how black life is even being viewed. You know, in my opinion, let me go on record, black life does matter. I don't care who says it doesn't, but I think a lot of people are just looking at it like this is just sending a clear message that black life just doesn't matter. You know, I mean, if he isn't indicted, isn't that exactly what they're saying to us?
Yeah, that's the exact message that they're saying to you. And I hope it wakes everybody up in this country, in the African-American population, and makes them want to get up and do something about it and make them realize nobody's going to understand that your life matters unless you make them understand that your life matters. You cannot kill our kids and think that we're going to sit back and do nothing about it. No race of people does that. No Asians do that. No Chinese do it. No Hispanics do it. No Caucasians do it. Who lets somebody kill their children and they don't say anything about it? I hope black America gets up and raises hell about it, because if you don't, they're going to feel like, no, your life don't matter because you ain't saying nothing about it. If something matters to you, you'll do something about it, won't you?
Yes, you will.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that is, you really, both of you hit that nail on the head. There's a lot of things that happen, and I think now is the time for the black community nationwide to galvanize, because
it is. We
are either tolerating it, we're either being pacified, we're either condoning, or we're either selling out. And I think at this point, the liberation piece of that in terms of the self-value and the self-worth is only going to come from black folks, just like you just said. And in doing that, a lot of people, when Trayvon Martin was murdered, they printed out T-shirts and the slogan, "I am Trayvon Martin." Well, a lot of people were saying that, but didn't know what they were saying. They were doing it out of repetition and model, but they were ignorant in their saying, because what that means to me, if I say that I'm Trayvon Martin or that I am Michael Brown, I'm going to be both of those young men's brother's keeper, meaning that it's as though my son or my nephew in my neck of the woods, I need to reach out to other grassroots, to other families that have done this has been done to, and we need to galvanize our efforts to try and make the change. But a lot of people come to the protest, they come and they march, they'll do that faithfully. But when you're talking about the long haul or the long road, a lot of people, I think some don't know what to do. They feel good, you know, they're feeling proud they came out to the protest. But at the end of the day, probable cause will still win, immunity will still win, and the way that the system with the cards are stacked with the criminal just us system will be stacked. So unless there's some kind of socioeconomic impact, unless there's people who are going to galvanize and then vote, and then unless there's people that not – see, when you ask a police chief we think that he should resign,
when you give a person a voluntary option, what do you think they're going to do? You have to make it so that they're going to have to say no, and you're going to have to demand it. But I think, like what you said, this is a focal point. See, Rodney King happened, people forgetting about that. Mm-hmm. These things that continually happen, and there's a kink in the armor, in the criminal justice system armor, it's time for us to take advantage and exploit that weakness. But if we sit back and we just allow this to go, because it's not, I feel confident, just like it's been said, that there's not going to be an indictment, and there never was from the get-go, because they knew how to play the game and the cards and to basically pacify the situation enough that people are still going to be upset, but there's going to be a few windows broken, a few fires set, but not in the potential that it could have been. And now they're pretty much comfortable that black folks are going to have a little bit of a dangling carrot, and they're not going to be as upset until the next man, black man or woman, is killed or is murdered. So I think we need to take this and a lot of the other black men and women that have been maliciously murdered, and we need to do something about that now. And rioting and setting fires, okay, you just tearing up your own neighborhood, and then after that, they're going to come in and arrest all the rebel rousers. So I think it's important with what you said to try and move forward with those things.
If you just tuned in, you come center stage tonight for the topic of the potential impact of the Mike Brown grand jury decision. If you have a question or a comment, get on the phone lines. Dial us up at 347-850-8390. Again, if you have a question or a comment, get on the phone lines and dial us up at 347-850-8390. Should Darren Wilson be indicted? Is one question that's on the table. What will happen if Darren Wilson isn't indicted? Where does the protest go from here if he isn't indicted? And where do we as a people go from here? We're going to go to the phone lines. We're going to pick up area code 314-853. Good evening. You're on center stage.
You know, Ms. Hines, I had a conversation with you. I wanted to have a conversation. Why do you put me on hold like that? And I can't say anything.
Well,
I know you do this pretty often. I can hear it, but I can't say anything. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Christmas about Ella Reasonover's case. You remember that case, Chris Gerald?
Yes.
You know how they held back evidence on that?
Yes.
And Burris Westphal, wasn't anything done to him?
No, he was never prosecuted. Ellen was released, and she did receive a financial settlement.
Yeah, but that wasn't the point. The point, she stayed in jail for almost 17 years because the prosecuting attorney held back evidence, and the judge made them bring all the evidence out of there. And they brought it out, and nothing happened to the prosecuting attorneys or the one that presented that case. And and I wanted to say this: how do the black policemen feel if a black policeman seen what had happened in that Brown case? Do you think he would come forward, as they call it, the code of silence? Do you think that black policeman would testify what he seen if he just hypothetically seen what happened? Do you think he would testify in the
If I could answer that, I thank you for mentioning the black police, because I think one of the biggest problems with the police forces nationwide is that they're not diversified from the top to the bottom. I'm not just talking about at the street level, but I'm talking about at the command levels too, because black police officers do not use deadly force against black citizens or white citizens at the level that these white police officers do. These white officers come in our communities and they use excessive force all the time. They come to our communities actually not to police, but more so to hunt, because it's this situation of us against them. And so they come with a totally different attitude than the black police officers do when they police in our community. And no, I don't think black police officer would come forward, because you have to understand, a lot of people don't understand the police culture. The police culture is different from any other culture that I know of as far as occupations go. The police culture runs deep, very deep. It's almost like blood. And it's not like Exxon or Enron or Bank of America. You're not going to have any whistleblowers in the police force. And that's the problem. Because if you're a whistleblower in the police force, you can end up dead, or either you leaving town as soon as you finish doing that. So, you're not, that's one of the biggest problems. That's the problem I'm having right now with the case that I represent with Von Derek Myers. I know they planted a gun on Von Derek, but the only way that you can really prove it is by somebody coming forward in the force, and they're not going to do that, because if you come forward against the police, you're going to end up dead, and it just does not happen.
But see,
and you could talk to anybody been in the force.
But see, a white policeman wouldn't have to go through that. He wouldn't have to go through that. The white policeman, he can lie all day. He can put things out what he want to put out. But it's the black police. And what do the black police? How do they feel amongst all of those white policemen? I wonder, do they
don't
feel
like
bad
it.
about that?
To the black police officers, they don't like it either. They know it's a double standard. They talk about it all the time. They will pull me aside all the time and tell me about what's going on with these white officers. They'll tell you what's going on with Darren Wilson, because when you look at the situation with Darren Wilson, he was a Jennings cop. And then when St. Louis County Police took over Jennings, they all applied to be St. Louis County police officers. Darren Wilson was turned down by St. Louis County because he had something in his background investigation which wouldn't allow him to be accepted. And then he went to Ferguson. But they know that he was bad at Jennings before he went to Ferguson. They know the deal, but they can't come out publicly and say anything, because if they do, they risk losing their lives. And these men have wives and families and obligations that they have to take care of, and they just can't go to the grave for this.
All right. Let's go back to the phone line. We're going to go to area code 571-335. Good evening. You're on Center Stage. 571-335.
Hello. Is that this number?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I just wanted to say we had covered some of the things that should not be done if Darren Wilson is not indicted, but we didn't talk about what should be done. Now, we have in America a Department of Justice. I think that rather than doing more marching and demonstrating among those really psychotic police in St. Louis, I think that we need to organize one march with as many individuals as possible coming from all around the country, and march around that U.S. Department of Justice that usually refuses to do independent investigations and exercise its authority to bring federal charges against police officers who the communities fail to indict. We know it's within their power to do so because it has been done, but it's very seldom used. It was used after Rodney King's beating and a few other incidents, but very seldom does the federal government use its power to bring federal charges to persons who were acting under the auspices, under the color of law, and did violations against human rights in America. We need to demand, just forget those people in Missouri, because some people are so racist that it's almost a mental illness. In fact, I think it is a mental illness. And you can't get through to a mentally ill person. You can't really coerce a mentally ill person to do what you want them to do, even if it's the right thing to do. It's impossible. So, because all our efforts are getting the Department of Justice to exercise its power to bring federal charges against Wilson and to try him in federal court. I think that is the best course of action. And as you say, as we all see, we've got racist, white supremacists in Missouri, but in Washington, supposedly, we have a good many people, including the Attorney General, who is a black person, and we need to seek justice there. We need to just not even try to continue to march, rally, and things like that in Ferguson. It's too risky. It's unnecessary. It won't really change anyone's mind in that area, but we need to go ahead to the next highest source. That's what I think. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I could say something.
Mm-hmm.
Kheri?
Yes.
I agree with her. I think we have to go to the federal government. Al Sharpton was here today, and he echoed the same thing, that we have to look for the federal government for charges. The only point that I disagree with her on is that we do still have to keep raising hell here also, because we have some changes that we still need to happen here in the St. Louis metropolitan area, and it's not going to happen if we don't have the agitation here, because nobody's going to pay attention. You know, it was the agitation that caused people to pay attention to the situation here, and we have to keep it up. We have to be steadfast and vigilant with it.
Okay, well, let me ask you something that I found very confusing, and that's all the autopsies that have been done on Mike Brown. I am thoroughly confused. I mean, how many were there total? Was it 3?
3.
3. Okay, weren't they all contradicting each other?
I haven't seen all the results, so it's hard for me to say, because the only way that we know about any of the autopsies is because of these leaks. So there has not been an official release of any autopsy report. Okay, the St. Louis County Medical Examiner, they did the first autopsy, which is always generally the best one in the sense that they get the original body fluids and the first contact with the body, okay? Then after that, the Brown family ordered an autopsy, which is what you have to do in order to get the results immediately, because the medical examiner's office is not going to release their results. It's going to be a while. That report is just now ready. And the attorneys that are working for the Brown family couldn't wait this long to know what was going on. And then the federal government also ordered an independent autopsy. So there were 3 autopsies that were done. But officially, we don't have the report from any one of them.
Well,
okay,
let's
talk about then. Hold on. Let's talk about the grand jury leak then, because allegedly, based on one of those grand jury leaks, that this was in the dailycost.com. Basically, they said that basically inside one of those autopsies was a report from Officer or Detective Hokamp, and basically Hokamp says that he took a statement from Officer Wilson August 9th. And allegedly, in that statement, it contains Officer Wilson's statement about what happened. Someone's got noise in the background? Oh. Okay. And basically, he's saying that, or basically, just reading from the Daily Cost, what happened is that account of what happened is totally contradictory to what Officer Wilson told the grand jury, which is very, very possible because 2 months later he's had a whole lot more information to work with than he did with, putting his story together when it first happened. And these are some of the things that are conflicting. Based on Detective Hokamp, there was no mention, allegedly, of, Wilson saying that he passed by and realized that Johnson's clothing matched the recent radio call for a robbery at Ferguson Market. However, allegedly, per this grand jury leak, Darren Wilson is saying that he was responding to the fact that when he saw Dorian Johnson and Mike Brown that day, that he saw the Dorian Johnson's clothing match the description of the person that allegedly had robbed Ferguson Market. Well, we know that's not the case, because I listened to the radio traffic myself that day from about that time, and there was no radio call for Ferguson Market, and there was no radio call for Darren Wilson calling and saying that either Mike Brown had been shot or that he needed the EMTs or that he needed a backup. None of that happened the day of the shooting. Officer Hogan also said that that Wilson had pulled basically. He said that he's basically. Let me go back. He says that he never mentioned that Wilson pulled away from Mike Brown and Dorian Johnson and then reversed the car. There was no mention of that. But now they're saying that Wilson said he backed his SUV up to talk to Brown and Wilson. So again, contradicting stories. Hocap also said that there was no mention that Darren Wilson had been beaten so badly that he nearly lost consciousness. So now we're understanding that he's saying that he was beaten so bad during the struggle that happened. So all these different contradictory statements that didn't initially get stated when he talked to Hocap, you would think if he was beaten that bad, it would have been obvious to Hocap, and Hocap would have made it part of his statement that Officer Wilson had sustained all of these different injuries, and therefore, they were even noticeable to him. Also, another thing he says is that the gun discharged during the struggle. That's what he told Hocap. Well, that's not what he's saying now. So when we're looking at all of that, what does that make us say, Gerald, as we look at that and we realize that Hocam has an official statement that went with the official autopsy, and now, based on all these grand jury leaks, that's not the testimony that Darren Wilson gave to the grand jury?
The grand jury is a secret process, Kheri. So we really don't know what the testimony was that Darren Wilson gave to the grand jury. And because there hasn't been an official release of the autopsy reports, it's just hard to go by any of that information because you don't know if the information that you're being given is truthful or not. What I will say is this. I firmly believe that Darren Wilson, when he gave his testimony to the grand jury, he made his statements corroborate with whatever he had been told the evidence was, which is why I had a problem with him coming in and testifying before the grand jury for 4 hours, because he had the opportunity to review all the evidence that had been out there and to then make whatever story that he had corroborate with that evidence.
Okay, so...
And I agree with you that Chief Jackson, when he released that videotape, clearly said that Darren Wilson had no knowledge. I will agree with you on that Darren Wilson had no knowledge that a robbery had even occurred when he approached Mike Brown.
So it's so many, if they go on just what the public knows and they don't indict Darren Wilson, how can that police department ever even get the respect of the people, from here going forward? I mean, every case will be, a question mark behind it. Everyone will be suspect of the police there. It sounds like they need to totally dismantle that police department and start all over. I mean, based on all those bogus fines and warrants they have down there and this Mike Brown case, doesn't it sound like they just really need to scrap it and start over since they're talking about getting rid of the chief anyway?
I think they do need to scrap it and start over, and they need to also get rid of the chief of St. Louis County also, because I think you guys are letting him off the hook. He's just as guilty. He was just as much accomplice with all of this as Chief Jackson. And that's why I say we have to continue to protest here in the St. Louis metropolitan area, because Ferguson is just one of 91 municipalities we have here that are acting the same way. you guys are not here, and you kind of focusing on Ferguson, but this could have easily happened in Jennings, University City, Pine Lawn, Pagedale, Clayton. You know, we have many municipalities here that have these same problems, that have these police forces, these small police forces, and they are over-ticketing the minority and the poor community to fund these municipalities. And the Washington Post, the New York Times, everybody has talked about the system here and how it needs to change. We need to eliminate the bulk of these municipalities. As small as this county is, we don't need 91 municipalities. And if the only way they can justify themselves is by fining and ticketing the citizens that live there, then they don't deserve to exist.
I agree 100%. And I'm going to make this last point about this leak, y'all, because, I mean, you got to think, those, you know, Joel, if we believe one leak, we got to believe them all. I mean, I'm just saying. So the last leak that allegedly came from this detective Hocamp was that Darren Wilson said he fired several shots at Mike Brown, all while Mike Brown was charging at him. But that audio, you know, that people have verified came from the day of that Mike Brown shooting. Basically, it showed that, you know, basically that Darren Wilson was shooting at least 11 shots at Mike Brown with the 3-second pause between shot number 7 and 8. So he shot 11 shots, and then there was a 3-second pause. Can
I say something? Can I say something about that? And I don't mean to interrupt you, but just think about this: if you running away from somebody and you unarmed and they shoot you, who turns around and starts coming back at somebody without a gun and they've already shot you? It doesn't even make sense. I mean, just think about it. You running away from somebody and they shoot you already, and then you turn around and start coming back at them, and you don't have a weapon, and they steadily shooting you? Does that make sense?
It doesn't. It doesn't.
Not at all. Who runs to somebody that's shooting them?
It doesn't make sense that you're running in flip-flops and turn around and decide to run back towards the person who's sitting at the end of the flip-flop. I mean, none of that makes sense. You know
we have more. Let me tell you this, Kheri. And I don't like, you know, that's why as a former prosecutor and a grand jury attorney, it's just so hard for me to watch this charade play out, because there is plenty of evidence to indict this man if they wanted to charge him. You know, the fact that we are sitting here debating this is ridiculous. You got 6 eyewitnesses that said the man had his hands up when he was killed and he was unarmed. So there's plenty of evidence for probable cause. Now, whether or not he's found guilty at trial is a whole nother story. But we're just talking about probable cause here. And if you want to make me believe that there's not enough evidence for probable cause, then I can tell you that there's people living on the moon right now. Because we got more than enough evidence for probable cause. I mean, it's ridiculous. And we even sitting here debating it. It's ridiculous that we are even allowing them to feed us this BS.
Well, you know what? Go ahead, Chris.
But that's why they defaulted back to the alleged video, because if you can't, basically it's like this. I believe, shoot a black man, just make sure you shoot one with a criminal record, because even if what's being alleged was malicious by the police officer, once you vilify and say, oh, yeah, 10 years ago he was convicted for armed robbery. Once you basically muddy the water, the police are going to get what they want. And then when you don't have a criminal record, then they're either going to plant a gun, some drugs, or they're going to make it because they know all they have to say is probable cause, and basically, you know, overnight you can indict a bologna sandwich. So the bottom line is that what has to change, I believe, is something around not police officers full immunity. Because to me, why should a police officer get immunity when I, as a citizen, don't have that? If I can have to protect or defend myself. I'm not saying that prosecutors and police officers should not have a degree of coverage. But when it is proven that they did wrong and then you're going to still allow them to hide behind immunity, to me, that breeds in the police department and the state's attorney, it breeds corruption. Because if in any given case that they feel they want to prosecute or not prosecute, it's kind of like it's brushing the wet in terms of if they're really going to investigate to get to the truth of the matter of is somebody actually innocent versus guilty. So I'm kind of on the fence in reference to with police, but you are right. But I also think that the state attorney general should also be hog-tied, and they should be a part of this as well as reaching out to the U.S. attorney general, because I can tell you from experience, even when you reach out to the U.S. attorney general and you don't agitate and make a lot of noise or you're a small potato, they're going to send you a letter and they're going to kick it back to you, and it's going to say, contact your state attorney general because we're not going to help you. That's essentially what they're saying.
You know, one thing that you brought up,
I think ultimately, as a people, we have to come together on this issue. We have to stop depending on God and white people to do for us what we can do for ourselves, and we have to look at that. We can't have these white officers policing in our community. That's the bottom line, because people will come back to me and say, well, you know, we have some bad black police officers too. But I'm going to tell you, look at the numbers, look at the statistics. The black police officers are not killing our people. They are not. And if the situation was that bad, I don't think – I know a lot of black police officers that I'm friends with, that I've worked with when I was in the prosecutor's office and as a defense attorney. They're not getting it any easier out here on the street than these white officers, but they're not killing our kids. That's the bottom line. So we have to put a stop to it. We have to just say all black lives matter, and you cannot set up a scenario where certain black kids you can kill and certain others you can't kill. We have to demand the respect that we deserve, and if we don't get it, we have to raise hell until we get it.
I agree. And you know what? Speaking of demanding the respect, one thing that really bothered me about this case was several black witnesses came forward very early on and basically had, you know, the same account of what happened. But then all of a sudden, you know, I think it was two contractors were happened to be in the area and said basically the same thing that all these black witnesses had already said. And all of a sudden people began to say, see, that means that is true, because they got people from outside saying the same thing. And I thought, when did we get to be a country where you can have 20 black people say something and nobody believe them, but you get two white contractors from another area, and then all of a sudden the story's true? When did we learn to stand it like that?
Well, yeah, it's been that way. One white witness is good for 10 black witnesses.
It's crazy. Well, you listen, we don't let the system, trick us. That's crazy. And we do the same thing with police officers. We allow their word to supersede anything that we say. That's crazy. There are lying police officers just like there's lying civilians. It's based on the facts. That should matter when you go to court. Why is it that? How did we lower the standard like that? What happened? Joe, I'm asking you, what happened?
I think it's just brainwashing. You know, we've been, from this dates back. This goes all the way back to low self-esteem, which was developed in our culture coming out of slavery. And we just have to always fight ourselves to break that cycle of brainwashing and devaluing ourselves. It goes back to the conversation I had with you earlier about, what's going on with the music. It's hard to say that you have value when you run around calling yourself nigger and bitches and hoes, and we're not pushing back on that. We have to push back on that. Like Malcolm X said, we have to wake up, clean up, and stand up. That's what has to happen. It's across the board. But you cannot expect that you're going to be valued when you're not valuing yourselves and you're not giving any pushback. And we have a moral obligation that we have to give pushback on that foolishness that's happening in our community, and we have to push back on these people that are killing our children.
Another thing, we're right at election time. What should happen at the polls in Ferguson? I think election day up there is November 4th. What should people be doing? Who should they be voting for? What should they not be voting for?
Well, local municipal election in Ferguson is not happening until April. So it'll be statewide and county-wide issues on the ballot come November the 4th. But people should be definitely exercising their right to vote. We're organizing a recall campaign for the mayor of Ferguson if he doesn't step down. And Bob McCullough is on the ballot, but he's unopposed. But that doesn't mean we can't start a recall campaign against him as soon as his election is over with November 4th. And that's what we plan on doing. We plan on recalling him and calling for a special election and drafting a candidate to run against him.
I love it. I love it. If you just tuned in, you come center stage tonight. We're talking about the topic, the potential impact of the Mike Brown grand jury decision. If you have a question or a comment, get on the phone lines. Call us up at 347-850-8390, then press 1. Again, if you have a question or a comment, get on the phone lines. Call us up at 347-850-8390, then press 1. Should Darren Wilson be indicted? That's the question that's on the table tonight. And if he's not indicted, what should happen? Should the protest kick off to another level? And as a people, where do we go from here? We're going back to the phone lines. We're going to pick up 314-381. Good evening. You're on center stage.
Hey, Kheri.
Hey,
and Gerald, how you doing, Gerald? It's Bianchi here in St. Louis with you. Haven't seen you since you had that big feast over your house when you was kicking off your campaign. You ought to have them more often for the food anyway. But, the question to what she just said, regardless what happened as far as the indictment is concerned, there's other things that we're still working on, and some of them even came to fruition, quietly as it said. For instance, like the removal of the box to check on city applications of felon. That's been removed. Another thing that needs to be done, Gerald, and not only in Missouri but in other states, the definition for deadly force needs to be revised. Because right now it's so vague, it's so wide, it's not specific. It needs to be revised so that when the agency heads interpret it, the rules and regulations that they set for their employees will be, they would be constrained to know what it is they can do and cannot do. I think, Gerald, that there should be a national registry for police officers who are reprimanded and who go out and agree a United States citizen, so that if they go to another municipality, then that municipality has the right to know exactly who they're getting involved in. When you had that officer that was out in Pagedale that put the gun in his brother's mouth and shot him, well, he tried to leave Pagedale and go to Kenlock. We followed him and ran him out of there. I think he tried to go to Berkeley. We followed him and ran him out of there. So he finally ran him out of the state. So there's a lot of things that's going to continue to be worked at. Like you mentioned, the recall of the mayor, the asking the police chief Jackson to resign, to have the state auditor come in and audit the police department, city hall, and the fire department to see exactly where all this money has been going. That's something that's going to be done no matter what the outcome is as far as Officer Wilson. And another point you mentioned, too, you're daggone right. We need to get these officers out of our community. We need to set up a training system where you can prepare young black applicants, whereas they can be properly trained, drug tested, and ready to go. There should be a separate entity that holds those applicants' names so that when the agencies, the police department, the fire department get ready for new hires, they have to go to this agency rather than continue to go to the good old boy system as they have been doing and coming up with the excuse, well, we just can't find nobody. So that's just a few. Gerald, you always do a good job. Keep it up.
You know what, Bianchi?
Thank you. I agree with all of that.
Hello. Bianchi, what do you think should happen? You're down there in that area. Do you think the protest should kick off to another level if they don't indict him? Or what do you think should happen?
Well, I think the protest should kick off another level to support the things that Gerald just got through talking about, support the things that I just got through talking about. And you know that whole cliche about black officers, It's not the fact that we're saying that black officers would be less brutal. We're talking about an economic issue here. I would rather see black firefighters because those are public works jobs. That's public works money. The people that makes up the majority of that community should have access to their jobs to at least the percentage that they make up in the community. So we would rather see people in the community bringing home the salaries, bringing home the wages, and more important, the pension. Wilson lived 25 miles from Ferguson. If he retired, he'd be taking a pension all the way back to Crestwood, where our children would not have access to the monies that he's spending for sports, recreation, and even education. So it's absurd that we continue to let that go. Some of them officers live all the way over in St. Charles, all the way down in Sullivan, Missouri. That's totally crazy. So, Kheri, to answer your question, if he is not indicted, then those that have grievance toward that should pursue those grievances. But these other issues, especially the economic issues, have to go forward.
No, I meant the protest to the streets.
Well, the First Amendment stands. First Amendment protects a United States citizen right to protest.
Okay. I saw that. Okay. You know what? One thing we haven't brought up is the makeup of this grand jury. Just in case you don't know, you've been under a rock some kind of way and didn't hear. We know the makeup of the grand jury for the Mike Brown grand jury is 6 white men, 3 white women, 2 black women, and 1 black man. Per Gerald Christmas, it takes 9 votes to indict. So with this being a secret proceeding and all, Gerald, you still say it's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen, and I think the makeup is the fact that you bring that up is significant because we know from polling that blacks and whites see this case totally different. And in order to get an indictment, you'd have to have 9 people on that grand jury vote for an indictment. And this, let's just say hypothetically that all of the black people vote for an indictment. They still need 6 of those whites to vote with them for indictment in order to get one. And I just don't think the numbers are in their favor.
So, and I don't either. If the truth be known, I don't either. So when you look at the fact that, I don't know if it was you that told me this, but I question what the strategy of this was. Was it you that told me that McCullough wanted the grand jury to look at every piece of evidence as opposed to just some of the evidence like it's typically done? Was that you that told me that?
That was me that I told you that. I said that's not normal because normally you don't present every piece of evidence to the grand jury because the grand jury doesn't determine guilt or innocence. It's just probable cause. So, normally you just give them enough evidence in order to get probable cause. That's all you're trying to do. This is not a trial. We're just trying to determine probable cause so we can move to the next stage. We're just asking them, do we have enough evidence to go from first to second base? So you don't need every piece of evidence to decide that.
And wasn't it also McCullough telling them to tell him what to charge Darren Wilson if he was charged at all, as opposed to him presenting to them what the charges could potentially be?
Exactly, and that was the other thing that I was talking to you about when I said this grand jury is accustomed to hearing cases from them, so they know that this is not the normal way that things have happened. I'm sure every other case that they presented, they've told them, we want this person charged with assault first, or we're going to charge them with burglary second, or we're going to charge them with burglary first. This is what we're looking for. I think this is probably the first case that they brought to them and said, all right, you look at it and do what you think is right.
And y'all, basically what we're showing to you all or outlining to you all is this ain't the way it's normally done. This isn't.
It's not at all.
Yeah.
This is not the way that homicides are normally done. When I worked in the prosecutor's office and we got an indictment on a homicide, we get it done in one day. We bring in the detective and a couple of witnesses. They would testify. The grand jury would vote. We get our indictment, and we be done. It might carry over to a second day or maybe to the next week if there was a scheduling problem with a detective or a witness. But, it was not this long, drawn-out process because all we were trying to do was get our indictment. and you don't have to give a grand jury every piece of evidence to get an indictment. As a matter of fact, you don't do that. That's what you do. You talk to any prosecutor's office. Don't just take my word. Poll them around the country. That's not. If we did that for every grand jury case, we'd have the whole court system backlogged. We're trying to get a quick indictment, so we get them just enough so we can get our indictment done and move on.
Well, and that's true in what you're saying. The question I would have then is, in terms of get that quick indictment, would you also say that whether you're going to, not you, but the prosecutor is going to try and pursue a quick indictment may also be related to not just the charge, but who that person is. In other words, a career criminal who just basically is cops arrested him for something that they allegedly did. Okay, you want a quick indictment, but I mean, reality is that depending on your last name or who you are, you may also not get indicted, even if you did a crime.
Well, most of the time, like I said, when we take cases to the grand jury, we get an indictment over 90% of the time. And in the grand jury, we don't even go over prior offenses. So your priors don't even, the defendant's priors don't even come up in the grand jury.
No, I understand that. I guess let me clarify. It could be someone of prominence that the state's attorney, for whatever reason, decides they're not going to pursue an indictment. I guess that's what I'm saying, versus somebody else who may have been a career criminal, but what's being alleged against them, there may be a greater push for an indictment versus someone else. And I guess I'm trying to paint the picture that it's sometimes just based on pure power and corruption. Some people that are arrested, but then never get formally charged because the state's attorney decides in that case not to. Not because they don't think they can get an indictment, but because they're not going to indict this person.
Well, yeah, the prosecutor has full discretion in making charging decisions. But, and to be honest with you guys, I think we're overthinking this. The bottom line is that Bob McCullough, if it comes back that there's no indictment in this case, it's because Bob McCullough did not want to indict the individual. There's more than enough evidence for probable cause. 98% of the time, grand juries are led by the prosecutor's office, and they do indict. The grand jury is an arm of the prosecution. I think if there's no indictment, one of the main reasons that's why Bob McCullough did not turn it over to a special prosecutor, because he wanted to keep control of the case to make sure that this officer was not indicted.
And
understand what I'm saying?
Even if the officer is indicted, Bob McCullough has got a prosecutor. Am I right, Gerald?
Right. Even if he is indicted, Bob McCullough would prosecute him, and he would probably do it half-heartedly the way the prosecutor's office did in the Trayvon Martin case. They did a horrible job in that prosecution, and then the prosecutor came out smiling, talking about justice was done with a not guilty. Now, I've been in the prosecutor's office. When you lose a big case like that, the last damn thing you're going to do is come out smiling, talking about justice was given. I mean, that was a dead giveaway that they didn't put any effort in seriously trying to prosecute that case. And I think even if you get an indictment in this case, it's going to be something weak, like involuntary manslaughter, that they know that he probably won't get convicted of. And even if he is convicted of, he'll get probation because that's a C felony here in Missouri.
And to show you, and to give you an example about how it's an important case for the prosecutors if they lose, look what in the O.J. Simpson case. The prosecutors, that one black prosecutor assistant, he started crying.
Listen, y'all, we're going to take another 5 minutes and talk about the Darren Wilson, Michael Brown case, and then we're going to move on to Von Derek Myers. We want to know from Gerald everything that's going on with this Von Derek Myers case, because obviously there's a lot of trickery going on with how they're handling that case. So if you got a question or comment, get on the phone lines now, or we're going to move on to get some updates on what's going on in this case, because this young man, I think, was it this Sunday, Gerald, he was laid to rest, Von Derek was?
Yes, he was.
He was laid to rest this past Sunday. And so as far as the Mike Brown case is concerned, y'all, listen, we all know what we're dealing with. Gerald has laid it all out. So whatever happens, you know, I was one of those people at first. I was like, listen, I hope they don't go to the streets, you know, again, because it could be dangerous. But one thing I'm going to do is not stand in anybody else's way. I'm going to pray for anybody who has the courage to go out there if they want to take the protest to the next level in terms of more marching, more not rioting, but more marching. I completely understand because the frustration level here at Center Stage is bubbling over too. So I absolutely, positively understand, and I pray for the protesters. I think we all should. I think we need to pray that, you know, a fair verdict comes out, even though most of us don't have that expectation at this point. But we hope and pray that they do the right thing. But if they don't, you know, to the protesters, Godspeed be with you, and may his angels protect and cover you. And we plead the blood of Jesus over you is all we can say, and we wish for the best. But
can I tell you a little about? Can I tell you a little bit about Von Derek? Because I have to go in a little bit, and I want to make sure that we have a little conversation about it.
Okay, tell us what happened.
Okay, Von Derek is also an 18-year-old black male that lives in South St. Louis. He lives in the city of St. Louis, what we call on the south side of St. Louis, and Von Derek had a pending gun case. It was the prosecutor's office had alleged that they had pulled over a car where they started chasing a car for playing loud music. This is the initial case that he was involved in. 4 black males passed a police car and they were playing loud music. So the officer decided that he began chase of the vehicle. And he began chase of the vehicle, and according to the officers, these males exited the vehicle, Von Derek being one of them, and that while he was running, he threw a gun in the sewer, is what they're saying. And he was charged with unlawful use of a weapon. It was his first offense, and the case was pending in court, and he was on a electronic monitoring. He was not on house arrest. He was on electronic monitoring, which means that, you know, you wear that bracelet on your ankle and they can monitor every place that you go. Okay, so this particular day, Von Derek and his friends were at the local sandwich shop, which is around the corner. They had purchased a sandwich. He had shared that sandwich with 4 or 5 of his friends. They had all eaten it outside, and then they started walking up the street. Him and 2 other friends, they just began walking up the street. When they got about halfway up the block, an officer came out from in between two houses with his gun drawn on them. Now, this officer is a St. Louis City police officer, but he was working a secondary job as a security officer in a neighborhood 3 blocks over. The officer says he approached them, told them to come here. They refused to come here. He grabbed Von Derek. Von Derek wrestled away from him. He pulled Von Derek's sweatshirt off, and Von Derek started running. The officer then alleges that Von Derek pulled a weapon out as he was running up a small hill by a house, and they got into a gun battle, and he shot and killed Von Derek. And so, you know, they set this narrative that he's this, you know, felon with a gun, and that's why they killed him, okay? So the St. Louis medical examiner, they did an autopsy on Von Derek, and we had a second autopsy done by Serial Rex, who is a known medical examiner around the country. He does he consulted in the Kennedy assassination. He did the John Benet Ramsey autopsy, the second autopsy on Anna Nicole Smith. He came in and he found that Von Derek was shot 8 times from behind, all to the rear of his body, with the kill shot being to the side of his head. And also what we learned, we could not know the order of the shot, but what we found was all the shots were in an upward trajectory to his left leg, which indicated what the witnesses said, that he was running away from this officer up the hill as the officer was shooting him. What's significant about two of the shots is that one shot totally fractured his femur, which is the bone in your thigh, which is the largest bone in your body. That shot would have taken him down immediately. He would have been unable to move, okay? Because it's not like a broken arm and you can drag that along. Once your femur is ruptured like that, you can't move at all. And he would have been in extreme pain. It would have taken his pain level to another level past the pain that he received from the initial gunshot. And then the other significant shot was to the side of his head, which was the kill shot. That shot would have rendered him unconscious, unable to move or speak. So what we can determine based on eyewitnesses is that eyewitnesses said they heard him screaming and hollering for the officer to stop shooting him, which means the kill shot had to have come last because he wouldn't have been able to scream or say anything after that shot. He also would not have been in any type of upright position. But then we also know he wouldn't have been in an upright position because of the shot that he took to the femur. So what we believe happened is that he sustained probably 4 to 5 shots to the back of his leg as he was going up the hill. Then he received the shot to his femur, which then took him down. The officer then fired maybe 1 or 2 more shots and then walked up and shot him in the head while he was down on the ground. Von Derrick would have lived had he not shot him in the head. The doctor said he probably would have lost that left leg because it was so badly damaged, his femur bone, that he doesn't know how it could have been repaired. But there's an excellent chance that he probably would have lost that left leg. But he would have lived had the officer just not walked up and executed him and shot him in the head. And then they're saying that Von Derrick had a gun. But all witnesses that we've talked to said that Von Derrick had no gun, that he was running up the hill as he was being shot. And the officer initially said that he was at the top of the hill shooting down at him. He was dodging behind a building, and they were in gunfire. Yet Von Derrick has no injuries at all to the front of his body. His upper torso is totally intact. And I find it hard to believe that an officer is, in front of him, shooting at him in a gun battle, and he sustains no injuries to the front of his body. And I know that the easiest thing for a police officer to do is to drop a gun on him. And these police here are no amateurs. You can Google it. If you go to St. Louis City cops planting guns on people, it was just this summer that they were riding a kid around telling him that he better find somebody for them to plant this gun on. Luckily, the kid recorded some of it on his cell phone and told his lawyer about it. But these guys are no amateurs, and that's why I said we have to have an independent party that comes in that investigates these police shootings at the scene. We need a rapid response team from either the Attorney General's office or the Highway Patrol, because whoever controls the scene controls the narrative. And it's, first of all, if you shoot Von Derrick 8 times, his body is going to be full of gun residue. And if you drop a gun on him, there's nothing to roll that gun in his hand before you bag his hands up for the coroner. Because remember, they have control of the body and the scene. They can do what they want to. They can manipulate the scene to fit their narrative. And I believe they would have done that in the Mike Brown case, but people started coming out too quickly for them to do anything. I think that's one of the reasons why the body laid out there for so long, to be honest with you, because they were trying to figure out how they could drop a gun on Mike Brown, but they just couldn't. They couldn't get it done in time because so many people started flooding out of that complex, and the situation got overwhelmed. But I am firmly convinced that they were trying to manipulate that scene. It just was too many eyes and too many cameras and too many cell phones, and it just started going out to the world too quickly. And it was broad daylight. When Von Derrick was shot, it was night, so it was a lot easier. And he was shot in the gangway. So it was a lot easier to come in and manipulate the crime scene before anybody could really see what was going on.
And they're trying to paint Myers out to be a thug and say that he had pictures of him, with the guns in his lap. And the problem I have with that, and I said this on Facebook this week, when you see white kids on Facebook with guns in their hands, it's their family is teaching them and preparing them for whatever may come. When you see a black kid with a gun, automatically he's a thug. How do we allow those standards to that? How do we do that? I mean,
we have to push back on that. And let me be clear to you about Von Derek took those pictures a year ago. The gun that they planted on Von Derek, they're claiming was stolen a month ago. So there's no way possible that any guns in that picture could be the same gun that they're planning on Von Derek, because they're saying it was stolen a month ago. And then get this, we're still trying to get them to release the name of the person who the gun was stolen from, along with the name of the police officer involved in the shooting. But let me back up real quick and tell you about what they said about the gun that was stolen.
Okay.
They said they recovered this gun at the scene, right, and they traced the serial number back to the store where it was bought. So they said they went back to the store and found the man who purchased the gun. And when they went to talk to him, the man said his son stole the gun from him. And then they said And then they said the man said somebody robbed his son and stole the gun from him. But nobody ever reported any of this.
Oh, okay.
Now, how does that sound?
All made up. All made up. And they won't tell you who that person is.
They have not released who that person is. But, supposedly this person bought the gun, then his son stole the gun from him, then somebody robbed his son and stole the gun from him. But nobody's ever reported any of this till now.
See? I mean, it's just getting harder and harder to believe the police. And these are the people who are taking an oath to protect and serve us. But, I mean, who are they protecting us from is the question. I mean, it looks like we need protection from them. I mean, that's the scary part. I mean, go ahead.
And this officer was working secondary. He was supposed to be securing another neighborhood. They have yet to tell us why he even approached Von Derek and his friends when they were walking up the street, because they weren't doing anything but walking up the street, and he comes out from in between two houses with a gun pointed at him, telling them to come here.
Okay, so this story about the YMCA was being broken into and they was behind the YMCA, that wasn't true?
No, there's no YMCA over there. There's no YMCA over there. This is a residential neighborhood.
So that wasn't the first story that they said they were breaking into something and he was stopping them from breaking into something?
No, you're thinking about you getting confused with that Ferguson police officer who was shot, and he said that he approached two subjects that were trying to break into the community center and they got away. Remember that? That happened maybe about 4 or 5 weeks ago. That's a separate story.
Gotcha. So the official story for Von Derek Myers is he wasn't doing anything but walking down the street and an off-duty police officer killed him?
Gerald, was that off-duty police officer in uniform or was he in a security uniform?
Well, see, that we don't know, because a lot of times when they work off-duty, they wear their police uniforms, but it depends on what unit he's in. See, they haven't released his name yet. So if he was in a special unit, he wouldn't have necessarily had on the standard police uniform that you're accustomed to seeing. Let's say he's a SWAT officer, and now he's working secondary, and he had on his SWAT uniform. Well, that's not the same dress blue uniform that you're accustomed to seeing a police officer in. SWAT wears all black.
Right, and those kids wouldn't have known who the hell this person is.
So they wouldn't have known who he was. But because we've yet to find out who he is, we can't yet determine what uniform he might have been in at the time that they approached him, at the time that he approached them. The real question is, why are you even approaching them with your gun drawn and all they doing is walking down the street?
And so they were on foot and he was on foot. Somebody approaches you at 7, I think it's about 7:30 at night, and he's asking them to come here.
With his gun drawn.
With his gun drawn. Wow. I mean, y'all, this is what we're dealing with these days. I mean, and this is happening too often where it's like shoot first, ask questions later. I mean, we got to
And then the police
this.
union, Kheri, the police union said they know what criminal behavior looks like, FY, black males. And then they said if you run and you holding your pants with two hands, you holding them up. If you holding your pants with one hand, you holding a gun. I don't know when that ever became police policy and procedure, because I've yet to see that in a manual.
That's scary stuff. I mean, but see, you know, we're just letting them get too lax with these standards. I mean, you know what? We got to demand more. We're paying these people salaries. I mean, and these people are acting, like I said many times before, they're acting like they are the law instead of the enforcers of the law. And there is a difference. There's an absolute difference.
And we also have to demand that you cannot kill our kids under any circumstances, because what they're trying to do is they're doing the same thing with Bondurant that they did with Mike Brown when they released their store video, because they tried to assassinate their characters, and some of black people fall for it and say it's all right to kill them. See, they tried to set this scenario that it's all right to kill Bondurant because he was wearing an ankle bracelet. It's all right to kill Mike Brown because he took some cigarillos in the store. And that's what we mentally have to push back from and say, no, you can't kill our kids under any circumstances, because I'm going to tell you, the white community, if you'd have went over in South St. Louis and you'd have killed a white boy because he stole some cigarillos, they'd still be burning down this city. And if you went over there and you killed a white boy because he was just on an ankle bracelet on his first offense, and you just came out in South St. Louis in the Hill and you drew your gun and started firing shots in one of those condensed neighborhoods, they still be raising hell. I'm going to tell you, Kheri, as far as I'm concerned, the black people here ain't mad enough. We still ain't mad enough. We still buy into some of this foolishness that it's all right to kill our kids. And that's why I'm fighting against this, because it's not all right to kill any of them. Bondurant Myers, Mike Brown, Kajimi Powell, all those people could have been taken in custody without the loss of life. But they go the extra step and they just kill our kids. And we sit back and have all this rhetoric about it and move on and say, well, what we going to do? That ain't right. We ought to do something about it. No, we ought to be raising hell.
You know, another thing too, any training material that's used to train police officers should be scrutinized by an independent committee the same way they do curriculum in the public schools. You and I cannot go into a public school and get in front of a classroom and start teaching something out of a book or whatever without it being reviewed and scrutinized if needed so.
And I think you're correct. The thing about it is that these police officers are violating policy. First of all, Darren Wilson should have never approached Mike Brown and those guys. Once he got into a struggle with Mike Brown, he should have called for backup to begin with. He's not following policy and procedure. He should have never started firing at Mike Brown. He should have been calling for backup once that struggle happened, and if those shots were fired in that car, he should have been putting out an all-points bullet to officer in need of aid at that time. In the Bondurant Myers case, when you work in secondary and you go and confront 3 individuals by yourself, that's the most dangerous thing that you can do, because when you work in secondary, it's not like when you're on duty. You're not attached to a radio. You're not being tracked. You out there as a lone wolf by yourself, and you trained not to approach 3 people by yourself. You trained not to start a chase or any type of gunfire in a condensed neighborhood. You trained not to go into alleys or gangways after people, because that's dangerous. You're trained to get backup, to get people to come in to assist you with that. These officers are trying to be lone wolf, gung-ho, going out, starting these situations, killing our kids, and then turning around saying it's their fault. No, it's these officers' fault, because they are not following their own policies and procedures. That's the problem.
Can you take one more question? Can you take one more question?
Go ahead.
Okay. We're going to go to Case Rod. Good evening. You're on center stage.
Hello. Hello, Shay. How you doing?
Fine. How are you?
So you're saying that, well, you know, one thing I say this, for black people still have not get it, that you are at war and the war has intensified, which it goes to the children, especially young black boys. And
wait a minute, the war has what?
Has intensified.
Okay.
And the war now is an attack on the black boys. And the funny thing about this, I see black people do this all the time. Some of them that's mentally, spiritually dead, most likely. They'll sit there and then believe everything that the European is telling about when they justify homicide youth. Which really intention, these are police officers that's supposed to so-called protect and serve, which they're not really intended for the interest of the people that pay them, most like corporation. That in this interest, they're not supposed to be shooting or killing anybody, period, unless it's necessary. But I see situations that be popping more than once. These are not unless necessary to kill. These police officers are not only crazy, but they have license to kill whatever they feel like it. And much times some of us consider argue, but they do. Because that's in their uniform, don't like melanated people. So at times they feel by dressing up, they can sit there and have open season on any person that's black. Boys, girls, or anything like that. So at times they sit there and sympathize that why our children get killed. It's like that same quota. They did that same stupid research where it said every 48 or more, 2 to 3 days, a black youth has to die on the hand of
Let me ask you something, caller. Do you have a question specifically for Gerald Christmas? Because if not, we're going to put you on hold until he's got to get out of here, and then we'll finish your comment. Do you have a question specifically for him?
I don't know the brother. What he does? What you do, sir?
Oh, he's an attorney. he's an attorney in Ferguson. Listen, Gerald's got to get out of here, but Gerald, tell people how they can get in contact with you. And if you're in the state of Missouri and need a defense attorney, I think I'd be calling Gerald Christmas. Gerald, tell them how to get in touch with you.
They can reach me at area code 314-361-2500. 314-361-2500.
And on Facebook, are you on Facebook? Any of the other social media outlets?
I'm on Facebook at Christmas Law. That you can find me at Christmas Law on Facebook. And then you can reach me 24 hours also at 314-652-2200 because sometimes stuff pops off late at night. So you can always reach me 24 hours at 314-652-2200. Now, Kheri, don't forget to mark those dates. I told you that the police go on 12-hour shifts, November 9th through the 14th. So be looking for some information to come out around that time, I think, and let's get back and talk again once we know what the grand jury decision is going to be. I love being on your show. I think you are fantastic, and I can't wait to meet you in person.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you so much for spending the night with us. We appreciate it. Happy Halloween. Listen,
I don't celebrate Halloween, but
we don't celebrate satanic holidays.
Some pagan holidays. I agree, Gerald. Listen, y'all, that was Gerald Christmas with the Christmas Law Firm there in the Ferguson area. Again, if you need an attorney in the Missouri area, I suggest you call that young man because he has got it going on. Okay, caller, I'm sorry. Now, if you would like to finish your comment, please feel free to do so.
I mean, that's all far I could say on that. I don't know if that's Hayaki that's on the line. But Hayaki will understand. You know.
Hayaki is on the line.
When I talk, I get directly to the point. And, you know, there's not really much advice I could tell black people into this so-called 21st century, but to really invent these any way possible can, you know what I'm saying? And stop playing games because this man doesn't play no more games for us no more. And every year, his intention and his bloodthirst increases.
Your phone is completely breaking up to the point we cannot understand you.
Well, I had to do the best I can. It's not a phone. This is something I'm calling on, so you know.
Okay, so you're calling on Skype. Okay, your Skype is breaking up, and we're not able to really hear or make out what you're saying. But we appreciate you calling in, caller. Listen, we got to get out of here before, ours start breaking up because Blog Talk Radio will cut us off. again, we want to thank Attorney Gerald Christmas for stopping by tonight and really breaking down the grand jury process, telling us what's going on the ground in Ferguson, really keeping us abreast of how it happened. Yes, PNG. We got to get out of here.
And one thing you found out, even if he is indicted, McCullough still has the prosecutor. That's why those other things are so important.
Absolutely. And listen, again, if you don't want to reach Gerald, he said you can reach him 24 hours a day at 314-652-2200. And he's on Facebook at Christmas Law Firm. Also, y'all, reminder, the views and opinions of our guests and callers do not necessarily reflect that of Center Stage, the host, or advertiser. So keep that in mind. Also, listen, next week, we will be right here at the same time talking to one of our own. Brother Christopher Barnes will be with us, telling us his personal story of his ordeal with the Chicago Police Department. Christopher, do you want to fill him in at all about what we're going to be talking about next week in terms of your ordeal with the Chicago PD?
Well, I would just say that if your listeners have internet access, and I'll just summarize this by saying, if you go to my website, it'll give you the backdrop to my wrongful arrest case and my last 6 years of litigation against the city of Chicago and the Chicago Police Department. You can go to www.major, or Mage, that's M-A-J, Bonds, B-O-N-D-S, Chicago.org. M-A-J-B-O-N-D-S-V as in Victor, Chicago.org. And it's a 5-page website. It'll give you all the information, documentation, so you can see what this is all about.
Wow. So next week, we're going to be talking to Christopher next Friday night about his personal ordeal dealing with this 6-year struggle with the Chicago PD that seems to never be ending, and we're going to figure out, what's going wrong, and we're going to try to get behind Christopher and rally to make this stop. Because, listen, I myself have been harassed by the Fort Worth Police Department for the last 3.5 years, so I definitely know what it feels like to have that particular struggle. Again, y'all, thank Gerald Christmas for stopping by tonight and being with us and breaking down the grand jury process. Thank you, the audience, for listening, and we'll see you next week right here, Center Stage.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate. You know how many black men graduate? Not many. Because you bring them down to this type of level where I feel like I don't got nothing to live for anyway.
Usually I might clown, but right now, this one's for Mike Brown, so pipe down. We gotta stop all the rioting in the streets. We ain't doing nothing but proving we animals to police. Another child dies, another mother cries. Another neighborhood left with a whole bunch of wives. Why did they pursue him? Why they had to shoot him? But I don't think that the answer is everybody looting. But forget that cop, he deserves state time. They let Zimmerman off, this cop ain't learned from Trayvon. I'm just sitting here dropping a little tear of knowledge. Cause Mike Brown ain't even lived to see a day at college. He would've started sewing it as an empty seat in class. All because of these demons hiding behind a badge. So screw that badge, screw your protection, and screw that law, carry your weapon. But some of these stores y'all looting is black owned. I know it's for a cause, but some of them still have families at home. It's not a black or white thing, it's about abusing the law. I can't imagine Dorian's face when he saw Mike fall. My tears wetting the page while I'm writing this. I know y'all so in tune, if you're not, why you fighting it? Just let go, let your heart beat and never lose control. And God rest his soul, cause I am Mike Brown. I am Mike Brown. He represent us all, we from a similar town. Walk them similar streets, we got similar police. So how I know I ain't gonna end up under a similar sheet. So I am Mike Brown, cause I'm out here with my homie. I'm just walking my block, man, everybody know me. So I am Mike Brown. I am Mike Brown. I am Mike Brown, homie, I am Mike Brown. I am Mike Brown.
He shot again, and once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the air, and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn, and he fired several more shots.
I am Mike Brown, I am Sean Bell. I am Larry Davis bleeding in my dingy cell. I am Angelo Clark, I am Oscar Grant. I am Dante Price doing what you others can't. I am Bo Morrison, Melvin Lawhorn. I am the voice of these people cause they are long gone. Let's go behind the badge, far behind the beat. Behind the politics, they wonder why we don't trust police. They wonder why we carry nines on us. They look for drugs but shoot for anything they find on us. I am Justin Sitt fighting for my life kicking. Slowly dying cause police said I look suspicious. We are all of these people in so many ways. I am Raymond Allen left to die for 2 days. I just bought a new hoodie, guess I'm Trayvon. I am Dwayne Brown, lay down, try not to die. On the halls I feel my heart beating slower, listen. And all you dealing with is maybe gonna lose your pension. You might not notice this, but this the new form of lynching. I got my hands up until I see that cop inching. The mystery of this, I think I never know. Why they had to shoot him down, couldn't just let him go. The mystery of this, I think I never know. Why they had to shoot him down, couldn't just let him go. I am Mike Brown, he represent us all, we from a similar town. Walk them similar streets, we got similar police. So how I know I ain't gonna end up under a similar sheet. So I am Mike Brown, cause I'm out here with my homie. I'm just walking my block, man, everybody know me. So I am Mike Brown, I am Mike Brown, I am Mike Brown, homie, I am Mike Brown, I am Mike Brown. You took my son away from me, you know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate. You know how many black men graduate? Not many. Because you bring them down to this type of level where they feel like I don't got nothing to live for anyway. They're going to try to take me out.